Hi there, and welcome to Savvy Entrepreneurs, the podcast that really supports all different types of entrepreneurs as they really move through their journey to success. I'm your host, Michele Burghardt. I'm the founder of thesavvymind.com and the creator of the Revenue Accelerator program called Breakthrough to Success. Today we are actually interviewing. I'm really excited to interview her. We've met before, never had a chance to really chat, but we are actually going to be talking with Laurel Clark today. Laurel has been educating people in the areas of metaphysics and universal law and dream studies for over 40 years. So I'm sure she's going to have some really interesting things to talk about. So let's just welcome Laurel Clark.
Thanks, Michele. It's great to be here.
I am so excited to talk with you. I mean, for one thing, I absolutely love to talk about what you do. I mean, it's just such an interesting thing. And, I always ask people to kind of send me some questions. And honestly, when we start talking, we're probably not really going to need them. But why don't you give people sort of a framework of what it is you do when you work with your clients?
Sure. So my company is called Whole Life Resources because I believe that everybody internally is whole. And that having a whole life means being healthy spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I like to have my work with clients be guided by them and what they need. And most of my clients are people who are in some kind of transition. So it might be that they are retiring and their whole identity has been built around the job, or their kids have grown up and they're still a parent, but they're not like a mommy who needs to take care of a kid and drive them to school. So there's an identity shift anytime that the structures in our life change. And I think that whatever age someone is, that urge to know, who am I? Who am I apart from the job? Who am I apart from my family? That's what I help people to discover.
So tell me what kind of, for lack of a better term, what kind of pain are your clients typically experiencing?
That's a good question, a good way to ask it. I would say that they have a sense, some people more than others, that there's something important they're supposed to do with their lives.
So do they sort of feel like they're missing something? How would they know that there's something other than, are they uncomfortable or?
So it might be they know they're missing something. It might be that there's a kind of longing. One of the first clients I had when I started doing this work on my own was someone who had worked for the federal government for 40 years. And he's a really kind, nice person, but kind of self-effacing. And even though he didn't really like being in that job, I mean, he was good at his job, but he didn't really like it. He had all of these dreams of what he was going to do after he retired. He's a really creative person. So he wanted to be a photographer. He wanted to write a book. I mean, he had all of these dreams. And 3 years after retiring, he's piddling around the house and playing around on the internet and,
right.
Not doing all of these things that he spent a lifetime dreaming about. So for him, it was this kind of gnawing worry that he was going to waste all of his creative abilities and have all these regrets when he was on his deathbed, in the most dramatic sense.
Yeah, that is a dramatic sense. So how is it that for lack of a better term, how do you flip that switch, or how do they feel, or what? I mean, how do you know if they're feeling better? Because what you do is very intrinsic. It's all basically internal work, correct?
It is internal, although I give people exercises or practices that they can do. So if people remember their dreams, I work with their nighttime dreams because part of my expertise is helping people to understand dreams, and they all have messages for us.
Right.
With this man in particular, part of his challenge had to do with self-esteem. So even though he's very creative, he didn't think he was. And so this might seem kind of a no-brainer, but I assigned him let me backtrack a little bit. He had a camera that had thousands probably of photos that were just sitting in his camera that he hadn't done anything with. And I knew how good they were. So I assigned him to post one photo a day on Facebook with no commentary. And because they were beautiful, he got all of these comments from people giving
Oh,
him
how
compliments.
great.
And I knew that just the feedback, unsolicited, that he got from people telling him how great they were, at first it was kind of like a secret thing inside of him that secretly he started to believe in himself. And then that grew. And then we added to it, he wrote a caption for each one because he wanted to write poetry. And so eventually he got into making a book that had his photographs and poetry that went with them, from doing one Facebook post a day that each one built upon the next.
And isn't that funny though? Sometimes it's such a small seed that grows into such a beautiful forest.
Yes. And, you know, I think a lot of people in their lives have had someone, it might have been a coach, it might have been a parent, it might have been a grandparent, somebody who believed in them enough to encourage something that they didn't think was a talent. And so to have someone who can kind of hold you by the hand, encourage you, you know, sometimes it might mean a little bit of tough love. Like with this guy, he wasn't doing it. And so I would send him gentle reminders, you know, at first, like, I can't wait to see your photo. Then it was like, okay, it's been 2 days. When can I expect to see it?
That's fun though. It's fun to watch their success.
Right.
It is. And if you are just joining us, you are listening to The Savvy Entrepreneur, and I'm your host, Michele Burghardt, and we are talking with Laurel Clark right now. And Laurel, tell us again the name of your company.
It's called Whole Life Resources.
Whole Life Resources. So what type of resources do you offer?
I work with inner resources, things like dreams and intuition. If people don't remember their dreams, I can teach them how to remember dreams and keep a dream journal. And
that's almost scary.
You know, it's scary if you don't know about them. I mean, anything that's unknown can be scary, but once people actually pay attention to the dreams and learn how to interpret them, they can be such a source of creativity, wisdom. I mean, I've had some amazing dreams, and I know people whose lives have been changed by their dreams.
Right. Oh, I totally believe that that's one of the ways your brain processes information and helps you develop solutions. I mean, I totally believe that.
Yes. So I work with that. I also teach other ways of accessing intuition. I teach people how to meditate, how to use deep breathing and relaxation principles.
That's
all
good.
of those designed so that people can really get quiet and hear their own inner voice. And then I also work with resources like visualization, understanding universal laws. Most people have heard about the law of attraction because it got popular, but there are actually 13 universal laws. So I teach about using all of those.
What is the universal law? And I'm going to paraphrase it. I think it's really interesting. It's kind of like the universe has its own time where you can't, what is it? It's not clarification, the law of clarification. It's such an interesting law. It's kind of like you can't push. Sometimes don't you feel like you're pushing against the timing of the universe, and you just can't do that. You have to I think you have to sit back and receive it. And it's kind of like, you know, you can't force grass to grow.
Right.
You know, you just have to let it grow. You know, and I did some research around that, and I just think it's really interesting. But now I can't think of what it's called, but it was something I hadn't heard of before. I mean, you know, yes, you understand that, but to actually think that somebody actually took the time to write it down and create a law around it was really interesting for me. because I think what you do is extremely interesting because I have a soft side as well. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, and if you are new to joining the podcast, my name is Michele Burghardt, and we are here with Laurel Clark, and I'm just really enjoying just learning about this. And what I'm curious about is tell me kind of give me an idea of what kind of clients you work with. I mean, what people come to you and where do you find them and what's their journey typically? Just kind of give me an idea of that. So if somebody maybe can help, they can maybe identify that maybe they would want to come and call you or something.
Sure. I work primarily with clients who are in some kind of life change.
I mean, is it any profession or is it is it just across the board?
It's pretty much across the board. So it's not limited to any age group. I had a client, for example, who was probably in her late 20s. She had just moved back to this country from Europe when she
Okay.
was pretty young, in her early 20s. She moved to Europe with a boyfriend who she thought she was going to marry.
Yeah, that never
And a
well.
variety of things changed. And so she came back to this country. The relationship had broken up. She was still in the same line of work, but she was working for a new company. And if you think about the changes that most people go through from the age of 20 to the age of 29,
Right.
that's a lot of changes. So she had
That
lived
is.
all of that time having her identity merged with this man who she loved,
Mhm.
and they kind of discovered that they weren't compatible to be married. They hadn't gotten married. So here she
And
was,
how long was she there?
almost 10 years, like
Wow.
probably 8. And so she was going through a big identity crisis, discovering again, who am I? And one of the things that had happened is that she had suppressed her creative side to be in that relationship. I mean, there were a lot of things he helped her to do to become more down to earth, more practical,
Oh,
financially solvent. And she had done all of those things at the expense of kind of
right.
the more creative, mystical, metaphysical side. Her parents were hippies, so she had grown up with
Oh, that's
that.
funny.
And so, in some ways, she was kind of the opposite of a lot of people. She wanted to not let go of the financial stability, but to
Right.
reawaken the spirituality. I've had clients who are retirement age, and whether they're retiring or not, they're looking ahead to, who am I going to be now that I'm not working at this job?
Right.
Sometimes it's people who are going through changes, like they're divorced and they've been married for a long time, or they're widowed and were married for a long time. And
I
although
can imagine that's got to be a really difficult transit. I mean, it's got to be a difficult transition.
it is, I mean, I think that people are not aware enough of how much we can merge our identity with another person
Mm,
in a relationship.
yeah.
And when that relationship ends, it doesn't mean that we go back to being the person that we were before we were ever married. We're the person who we are now, and yet we don't have that blended identity. So kind of discovering new, who am I, or what am I interested in, it can be challenging. And especially
Right.
if it's been a situation where someone has kind of sacrificed their identity, it can be even more challenging. So I've had female clients who were married when they were young, and they really didn't realize how much they had kind of put their own desire and self-development to the side to be able to be married, raise their kids,
Mhm.
not necessarily out of a negative kind of sacrifice, not
Right.
that they resented it, it's just what
Right.
they did. And then now they have free time, they have freedom to make choices, but sometimes they don't even know, what do I want? What do I like? What's important to me? So being
Well,
able
don't
to,
you almost think too, Laurel, that no matter what kind of transition you're going through, right? It doesn't matter if it's a business transition, personal transition, uh, marriage or divorce transition. To your point, if you merge that, you merge your personality even with your work life. So once that is separated, you can't really go back to that. If you've worked for a company for 20 years, well, you're no longer that 21-year-old person that started at that company.
Right.
And so, I mean, to even try to go back to that pre-employer person, I mean, that person's not even there anymore.
Right. And sometimes it can be a situation like someone who's been in management, or they've owned their own company, they've been in a leadership role, and maybe have not really developed having peer relationships. And
Right.
so now they're not in a leadership role, and they might have a challenge even knowing how to be a friend because they're not used to that peer kind of relationship. And what
Yeah.
makes it even more difficult is that sometimes people don't even realize that. They don't realize why something isn't working until they do some self-development work. That's why I think the dreams and meditation can be so helpful to get some inner guidance as well as whatever their conscious ideas are about what's going on or what's
Right.
missing.
Do you find that people that were in very, and this is my personal opinion of just from what I've observed, people in really either high pressure jobs or situations that require a lot of time, whether that time is in, driving an hour to and from work because of where you live, which then by the time you work 8 or 9 or 10 hours and then drive an hour to and from, you don't really have a whole lot of time to do much of anything else. So during your adult life, if you do that for 20 or 30 years, you don't really have a whole lot of time to develop friendships or hobbies, and then that person retires. And so do you find that is weird, because then people, they don't know what to do with themselves? Because they don't have any hobbies to fall back on. They don't have a lot of, like you said, they don't have a lot of friends. Is that something that you work with?
I do. And the way that one person described it to me, I thought was really a very beautiful metaphor. He said, it's kind of like jumping into a swimming pool, and I can go anywhere I want to, but I'm drowning because I can go anywhere I want to.
Right.
And he was so used to having a structure that dictated what time he had to get up, what time he was going to do certain things. And when he
Right.
didn't have the structure, even though he wanted the freedom and he liked the idea of the freedom, it actually was kind of scary to him. And he had not practiced making decisions. And I think that can
Oh,
be part of the challenge
right.
is, even though people might resist the fact that they say, well, I don't have any choice, I have to do this, there's also a certain security in having a structure.
Right.
So it's a matter of refiguring all of that.
Sure. And if you're just joining us right now, my name is Michele Burghardt, and I am your host of this fabulous podcast called The Savvy Entrepreneur. And we're here with Laurel Clark. And Laurel, what I'd like to talk with you, because we need to wrap up shortly, but I want to just talk about, can you tell me, give me some examples of before and afters, so that people can kind of have something to wrap their arms around. Is that a fair question to ask you?
Sure. So one thing that I really appreciate is helping people to find small, simple ways that they can improve their lives. It doesn't have to be a huge career transformation. So, for example, I was talking earlier about a young woman who had moved back to this country after being in Europe with a boyfriend, and she had kind of lost her creative self in the relationship. So, when she started seeing me, she was um, kind of depressed. she had a good job, so finances wasn't really an issue, but she was having a hard time making friends. She was living in a big city.
Oh,
And
right.
um, so she started doing one thing a day that was creative. That was, no other limitations to it. So one day, it was in the fall, she had gotten a bunch of apples at an apple orchard, way more than she could eat. And so she carved them into these flower shapes and
Oh,
baked them. And then she gave them to her neighbors. And
nice.
so by giving them to her neighbors, then she started to make friends. It was something fun for her to do because it was creative. She was really into sustainability. So the fact that, this was a natural resource,
Right.
it just helped her to express herself in ways that were important. And it wasn't a life or death thing, but it was something simple that led to other things, like some new friendships with some of the people
Right.
who lived in the apartment building that she did.
Which is important. Way
Right.
more important than people think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. The retired man that I was talking about, who also was very creative and kept longing for what he was being able to fulfill all these dreams after he retired. He went from pretty much wasting his free time in retirement, just piddling around, playing on the internet, to actually having a book that was made of his photographs and his poetry. And that happened from doing one small thing a day that helped him to gain confidence in his creative ability, to get feedback from people. Um, During, this was pre-COVID times, one of the exercises I gave him that he loved was to go to a coffee shop every day and sit there with a journal and just write about the people that he
Right.
saw. He had these really interesting observations, kind of a nice sense of humor. And so he discovered that that was a enjoyable way for him to get out of the house. And it also led to him making some friends, because
Right.
there were a couple of regulars in the coffee shop. They'd see him there every day, and some of them came over and initiated talking to him. So
Nice.
those are some simple examples. There also have been people, there's one woman who I coached, I guess I would say, to write a book that she had been wanting to
That's
write forever. And I have written books. There are quite a few books that I've written and published. And um, that was so gratifying. I think it might have even been more gratifying for me than it was to her to help her birth this book. It felt like being a doula to help her
Oh,
birth
that's
this
so great
creative
though.
idea. Yeah.
That is so great. Do you want to tell everybody how they can get a hold of you? Tell everybody your website and however you want to tell them to find you.
Sure. So people can find me at laurelclark.com. It's LaurelClark.com. They can also call me. My phone number is 859-230-4146. Or they can email me. They can email me from the website, or it's laurel@laurelclark.com.
You are so fortunate that you have such a nice, easy to spell name. That is such a blessing. You don't realize. So, do you have maybe kind of take us out of here? Do you have just a pearl of wisdom that you'd like to share with people?
I love that question. And I would say that I firmly believe that every person has something special and unique to offer to the world. And that the more that each person really expresses who they are, the better world we all live in. I think that we're all here to aid one another. So, whatever that urges, desire, if there's something that keeps going through your mind, I would say find some small way to act on it every day so you can
I
be
love
the gift
that.
that you are.
I love it. I love it so much. Laurel, thank you so much for taking your time to sit and chat with me. It's been great. I've loved actually getting to know you a little bit more, and I'm sure anyone that's listening to this is saying the same thing. I just highly recommend that anybody wants to learn more, contact Laura at her website, and I will see you all next week.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.